Hi everyone, this is Navika Chada, Cloud Engineer, Microsoft Most Valuable Professional in Azure category and a LinkedIn Top Voice in Cloud Computing. I warmly welcome each one of you to the 23rd episode of Tech Chat with Navika, wherein today we would be discussing about integrating AI with cloud services and typically getting started with the LLM models. And to help us understand that a bit more better, we have an absolute expert with us today, Mr. Lee Stott. Lee is a principal cloud advocate manager in AI, Azure Experience and Ecosystems at Microsoft. He is an extremely experienced and learned professional with over 2 decades of experience in the IT industry. His expertise is in the field of software development and AI and literally everything related to it. Lee empowers developers and organizations to harness AI's potential using Microsoft tools, services, technologies, and platforms. Thank you so much, Lee, for taking out your precious time and joining me in today.
Hi, Navika. Honestly, this is a pleasure, so I'm glad to be here.
Likewise, thank you so much. So I literally cannot wait to get started with the episode and dive into the world of AI and related cloud services. Since the topic of today's podcast is integrating AI with cloud services, and if we see an AI project from that lens, we can typically divide it into 3 sections altogether, right? One is the model selection, then model customization and fine tuning, and last but not the least is model deployment, right? And
Yep.
in today's episode, we would be walking through each of these sections to help us, our viewers, understand a bit more better. Starting with the first section, that is the model selection, we do have 2 prominent services within it, right? Azure model and the GitHub Marketplace catalog. So, would you like to throw some light in each one of this to just get started with?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. So as you said, as Microsoft, we have 2 predominant ways of you getting access to large language models and small language models. So we have the new GitHub model catalog, which is part of the new GitHub model marketplace. So if you go to GitHub Marketplace, there is now a section called models. It's currently today under private preview, so you do have to sign up to get access to this service. But what's really interesting about this service is it's completely free. So anybody who has an existing GitHub account can simply sign in using their GitHub credentials or their personal access token to access those models. So it's very friction free. It's a great starting point for anyone who's very interested in getting started with models. This is really from a test and evaluation perspective. Now, the model catalog in GitHub Models is a limited subset, so it's not every single model that's out there. So I think if you go to Hugging Face today, there's tens of thousands of models available. What we're trying to do with Azure is really focus those models into 2 different buckets. So we have the models under the GitHub model catalog, which are basically a subset of the models that are available. So these are models from Meta, they're models from Microsoft, so models like the 5.3 model, and there's models there from Mistral and other partners, but they're only one model in each case. So you don't have all the different versions, you just have the most up-to-date current version. So it's really from that trial perspective. So you can select the model and access that model. And that model catalog is completely a closed catalog. So it's not like Hugging Face where you can upload additional models. It's just there from a consumption piece. What's really key about this is it's the ease of access. As I said, it's using that personal access token. So you just sign in, know the credentials, and you can access those models. Those models are all really using a great service called the Inference API. And I'll talk a bit more about the Inference API later because it goes across both the Microsoft Azure model catalog and the GitHub model catalog. So it allows you to simply interchange. So the idea is we want people to get started with GitHub because they're not used to the Azure ecosystem. They just want to get started with the model, evaluate it, test it, and then when they come to deploy it, move into the Azure platform stack with AI Studio. So if we look at the Azure AI catalog, this is a much more extensive catalog. There's over 1,400 models available. Now, the key differentiator to the Azure AI catalog is that all the models go through some form of responsible AI. So they are protected, they're not uncertified. That's done by a third party. So there is a level of protection to them. And again, you can access and integrate with those models in a very similar way you can do with the GitHub model catalog. So there's things like the playground. So you can go into the playground and start conversations with models and do comparisons between models. So by simply changing the model name, you can then interface with those different models. So you can, use a prompt on Phi-3, for example, which is a small language model, and then compare that to GPT-4o, which is a large language model. And again, you can see the differences in terms of the inference times, in terms of the responses, in terms of the format of the responses. So from a developer's perspective, the first step is really that playground opportunity to evaluate the models. We then have formalized evaluation, of course, where you can actually go into more detail and evaluate models and compare models against other models, and there's benchmarks, etc., to show you where that model sits in terms of reasoning, knowledge, and the entities. So that's like a quick introduction to the two different model catalogs. As I said, there's this thing called the inference API. So what we've done as Microsoft in our engineering teams is looked at all these different models, and people have been using different SDKs and different APIs to connect to different models, because each of the models is produced by a different model provider. What we've done is said, look, we need to make this as simple as possible for all developers. So we've developed a thing called the Azure Inference API, which is a single API for any of the models currently within our catalogs. So this allows the developer to simply change the model name in their code. So when they've deployed the model and they want to connect to that model, they use an SDK or they use the SDK. That can be in Python, it could be a REST API, it could be in C#, it could be in .NET, it could be in Java. We want to make it as simple as possible, so that you don't have to refactor all your code. All you simply do is present a different model name to connect to a different model. So then, you can then actually use it for evaluation. You can then decide which model is the best fit for your solution. So the Inference API has been a key opportunity and advantage to that rapid development and rapid prototyping, and also rapid production and implementation of a large language model or a small language model AI solution. So some of the key factors, that developers want to do is really look at things like fine-tuning and evaluation. Evaluation is so key as a developer. You want to be able to make sure that you're using the best model from both the output perspective, but also the understanding and reasoning of that model. So what is the basis of that model? And again, what we want to do is do that evaluation from both an optimization perspective, and then also from a responsible AI perspective. And this, again, where Microsoft comes really key in terms of that deployment solution, is in terms of building responsible AI and evaluations of the model based on guidance and responsibility. So, is the model doing coherence, groundedness, and relevance of the data in the most effective ways? And with tools like AI Studio, so Azure AI Studio, we've really built those tools into the solution. So it's very, very simple for you as a developer to run evaluations on your solutions and your models that you choose, to then, get the best, to understand what those results are. And those results really then lead to things like fine-tuning. So what we want you as a developer to do is ideally fine-tune those models based on your business data or your requirements to have the most optimized output. And again, fine-tuning is built into the Azure AI Studio solution. It's not built into the GitHub solution at the present. You'll only have the playground facilities in GitHub models, but once you want to move to that production output and evaluate and compare models and benchmark models, that's when you should be using AI Studio. So it's literally just take your code from the evaluations and the proof of concept that you've built with the GitHub models and move it to AI Studio. So it's not like you have to rebuild anything or redo anything. So that's a quick overview of like the process of a developer choosing and evaluating models, then deploying those models, and then ideally going on to do evaluation from both a technical perspective, evaluation from responsible AI perspective, and then undertaking some form of fine-tuning on that data. So the idea is we keep you as a developer either within Visual Studio Code or within the AI Studio UI as the AI Studio portal.
Thank you so much, Lee, for such a detailed explanation. And thank you for giving a differentiation as well within your answer between the GitHub Marketplace catalog and the Azure model catalog. But as you mentioned, the Azure model one is a bit more extensive, right? So would you quickly just, would like to name certain models that are available on Azure model catalog, which are, which can be used for
Oh yes,
various.
yeah. So as I said, each of the catalogs has a selection of models available. The GitHub
Right.
models is a subset. So you have models from OpenAI, Microsoft, Meta, etc. in there, and Cohere. Within the Azure model catalog, there's a huge variety of models. So there's models from third parties like Hugging Face, so you can actually get access to Hugging Face models, NVIDIA models, so things like the NVIDIA NIM, and the NVIDIA models for the specific GPU hardware. You've got access to Meta, you've got access to Mistral, you've got access to Cohere, you've got access to the majority of the large language models that most of the audience will be familiar with. So there isn't a model that is necessarily missing. It's just that Microsoft has gone through that additional ratification process and compliant process to ensure that those models are all responsible. So all the models that are available have gone through that safety check-in and compliance to ensure that when the model is deployed within the Azure ecosystem, it's secure and safe from a responsible AI perspective.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think even in your answer previously, you mentioned about Azure AI Studio, and that's like almost the second, the second selection, the second process. After once we have the model selected, the next is to, fine tune them, as you mentioned, and, to customize them. And that's when Azure AI Studio actually comes to the play, into the picture. And can you just, describe the main features of Azure AI Studio, which actually makes it pretty comprehensive platform for AI development in general?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, so the key advantages with AI Studio is it's built as an AI solution for an organization. So we work on this principle of what we call hubs and projects. So if you're familiar with Azure, you know the concept of a resource group. A resource group is a solution environment where all your associated resources to your project live. So if you want to add an additional service, you add it to that resource group associated to that service that you're operating. What we've done with AI Studio is created a similar concept. But if you think about data science and machine learning engineers within a team today, they're typically within a larger organization and they might be split between different business units. So what we've done is we've come up with this concept with a hub. So a hub is like an organizational unit. So all the machine learning AI teams will operate from a hub. So this is your home. So it could be a departmental hub, it could be a group hub, or it could be an organizational hub. And this really goes back to the principles of Azure Security Fundamentals, and trust and access to data. We will only want people with the right permissions to access those data or those data sources. So the hub is the root model. And then within the hub, we can have multiple projects. So think of a project as a resource group. You would have a project for a machine learning experiment or application that myself and Navita were working on, and only us would have access to that project, but we would be part of the hub. So we might be able to see other projects that are happening, but not be able to actually see the content of those projects. Or we might not even be able to see any of the projects. So from an IT administrator or governance perspective, it allows you to have that granular control. Once you're into your project, you then have access to the AI Studio itself. So you've got access to the model catalog. You've got access to evaluations. You've got access to fine tuning. You've got access to all those different services that you will then undertake, and deployments, of course, to undertake that whole application development lifecycle. So that's the key opportunity with AI Studio is you're building this environment where a developer can live and stay, and they're not having to go out to Azure Portal, they're not having to go out to other portals. Everything lives within this environment.
Right. Thank you for actually explaining the infrastructure. I think the people who are new to Azure AI Studio working, I think they would be able to relate, because as you related it to a resource group, and further how do we deploy resource within it, and then you compare it to how the Azure AI Studio essentially works. So thanks for that detailed explanation. In one of your answers previously, you mentioned about playground and actually how can we experiment with the different models over there. So I would just love to hear a bit more about it. If you can just throw some light and explain
Yeah,
what's
definitely.
the
Yeah.
role of a playground in Azure AI Studio. Yeah.
Yeah, so both marketplace opportunities, so GitHub Marketplace and Azure Marketplace, have a service called the Playground. Now, the Playground is exactly what it says. It's a playground where you can test and experiment with different model types. So number one, it allows you to select the model. And again, this is from all the available models in either marketplace. So you just simply have a selection option of the model type. You then have different factors or settings that you can impose upon the model. So things like the temperature, the things like top P, top Q, etc. So it allows you to have different interface. It allows you to change the settings of the conversation that you're having with the model to see the changes in the output to that model. Of course, you have things like the system prompts. So the system prompts is really the ground rules to the LLM. So this is where you can give the LLM a persona or give it some factual information about the things that it does know or doesn't know, or the way you want it to respond. So it allows you to build really a quick, immediate proof of concept of the types of responses and interactions that you will be having. And again, it's a chat interface. So, you can prompt and you get the response back, and you can prompt and you get the response back. And it also has a history. So, it will allow you to have a number of conversations and retain the history and the cache of that chat. So, you allow you to do multi-prompting within that solution. So the Playground is there really to just let you quickly experiment and validate, and then move into that, I'm going to now deploy the model and now use code against that model with the API or SDK of your choice to then interface with that model.
Got it. And I think it's a good practice as well then, right?
Oh yes, yeah. Having a Playground is a really good practice just to, just to validate the prompts that you're wishing to use and understand the output that is received.
Each of the model is, good at performing a specific type of task, right? And hence, it is important that we select the right model for the right purpose, right? And as we talk about that, hence comes the ability of switching between, different models without actually changing the underlying code. And as I talk about
this is again a great point, Navita, is one of the key features within the AI Studio is this service called Benchmark. And Benchmark allows you to do that model comparison, and then will draw you a benchmark diagram of, where does the model sit? So, where does it sit in terms of knowledge, in terms of inference, in terms of output, in terms of different factors, so that you can then actually just do a quick visual compare of like, this model. So a great example is, like the Phi models, the Microsoft Phi models, which are small language models, were trained a lot on math problems. So, if you wanted to understand math outputs, be able to give it a formula or an equation and have a response, you will get a very good output from the Phi model. Whereas, GPT is an open model trained on pretty much everything. So you can actually use a benchmark to quickly do an overlay of, where does this model sit versus this model? So the benchmark is a great tool for just saying, I want to have a model that's great for chat, or I want a model that's great for inferencing, or I want a model that's great for mathematics. So that's actually a filter that is available in the benchmarking option. So, that's your benchmark is a great first stop to, to see which is the best model. And you might say, these are the best models in this category. Then use the Playground to evaluate quickly, so that's a quick evaluation. How do these models compare? And then, when you get down to like, oh, these models are really good to, I can't really tell the difference from a prompt of these two models, put those models through the actual evaluation to then understand how does that compare. And again, with evaluation, you can provide data to the model to then evaluate it based off the data or the data sets that you want to ask that model. So again, you're taking it to that deeper level of understanding and a deeper level of outcome and statistical reports to you as the application owner, which is the best model. And most importantly, it also creates a documentation lifecycle of why you as a developer chose that model. So, if you have to go through an internal audit or review or an assessment of why did you choose X, Y, and Z, the AI Studio and this process will give you a paper trail and reports that you'll be able to submit and say, look, this is why we did it this way. This is why we chose this model. These were the reports of the evaluation outcomes. This was the responsible AI report. So again, it gives you that coverage and clarity to be able to explain to business decision makers why you went with those technology choices.
Oh, that's good. So like an automated documentation, you mean? Just it gets...
It doesn't necessarily automate the documentation, but it produces reports for you each stage.
Reports. All
yeah,
right.
so
Like
you get a copy of report to say this is the statistics of the model. This is the benchmark of the model.
Got it. All right. So it pretty much looks like first we have the benchmark wherein we can do the quick comparison, then we have playground, we can do the evaluation and testing, and finally moving it to action, right? That's how it
exactly, yeah. And to be honest, to move into deployment is so simple. It's literally like 5 steps.
Actually, Azure API inference actually comes into the picture, right? When we talk about the deployment and switching between the models. So do you want to tell something about it?
Yeah, so the inference API is really key because what we've tried to do is make model access as simple as possible by providing really simple APIs and SDKs. We've got a dedicated model which is the Azure AI model within the Python library. So it's an actual library. So azure.ai.inference, which is the library which literally allows you to connect to your AI model. And again, we have documentation in .NET, C#, Java, JavaScript, Python. We're trying to cover as many languages as possible so that as a developer you can get started. And again, as I said, the inference API is so nice because the only real change you as a developer need to make if you have a different model selection is the model name. And the model name is displayed on every single model card. So when you go into the model catalog, you can see what we call a model card. And the model card gives you like the benchmark statistics of the model. It gives you an overview of what that model is, what the use cases for the model are. You also get information around the cost, of course, the number of tokens. And again, this is more important when you're running the free services on the GitHub model catalog because it'll tell you how many calls you can make within the free quota. It will also give you the sample code to get started. So there'll be a sample tutorial. And so in terms of the inference API, it's really about how to get started and make it as simple as possible. So again, one of the key features is we've provided as much detail as possible on the model card, which allows you to get started with what the actual model is. So it gives you the details of the model name, the type of model that you're actually interfacing with, the benchmark results of that model. So, how does it compare? And it also has comparisons to other models. And then there's actually code samples to the SDK. So there will be a tutorial and there will be then the SDKs and APIs for things like REST, for Python, for JavaScript, for Java, etc. So as a developer, that's like really an easy way to get started with building your first AI implementations. We try and provide that real easy on-ramp to those resources.
Right. Lee, thank you so much, firstly, for giving such detailed answers, I must say, for each of the questions. But as we are sort of heading towards the end of the podcast, though we literally started everything from scratch and you've literally covered all the important points, but to someone who is new in this field of Azure AI, is there any roadmap coming from you as an expert would be a big, reference for them? Like, what's the roadmap newbies to Azure AI can actually, adopt to get started in this journey?
Yeah, definitely. So, we've got some great resources. So, there's things like Microsoft Learn, which everybody knows about, which is a set of documentation, a set of Learn modules and tutorials to help you get started. if you're really new at this, we have an amazing open source curricula, which is 18 lessons, which is called Generative AI for Beginners. And Navika will share the link. But this is really, your first step. It will guide you through what generative AI is, how to get started with generative AI. It has samples and examples which utilize both the OpenAI SDK, the GitHub models environment, and the Azure AI models and the inference API. So again, it doesn't matter if you're an existing Open API user, you can use their SDKs, or if you're going to become an Azure user, we'll bring you into the Azure environment and help you through getting started. So I would say they're like your first two key starting points, because that will show you, GitHub models, Azure models, inference API, then progressing to Microsoft Learn. And of course, if you want to become an AI developer in the future, there's the certification pathways, which take you through the fundamentals, the new micro credentials from Microsoft, and of course, the associate level exams once you want to become a certified AI engineer. So I think we provide the end-to-end story for you to get started.
Absolutely. I absolutely second that point. I think Microsoft Learn provides us with such extensive and such educative modules and learning paths. And as you just mentioned, you can, and I think whether it is AI or whether it's computer infrastructure whatsoever, related technology to Microsoft, it's so comprehensive altogether. And as you mentioned, starting right from the scratch till the end, it provide. And I think that there's this option of sandboxes also, right? So if someone wishes to, just try to play around a bit with the resource and all, there are sandboxes. So you just have to sort of simply, this for the viewers, they have to just simply create an account and get started with Microsoft Learn. That's how
definitely. Yeah. And if you look at the AI 900, which is like the AI fundamentals, as Navika said, there's a thing called a sandbox, and a sandbox is really just a free virtual machine. So it's a free virtual machine with an Azure subscription associated to it, which is completely free, but you get a limited amount of time on that sandbox. So it's typically around an hour, but that hour is for you to work through that module step by step in that environment and to produce the solution that the environment is built upon. And again, it's a great learning experience because it's literally hands-on. It's not instructor-led, but it's document-led. Yeah. And, if you follow it step by step by step, you will end up with a solution at the end, which then you can go and replicate in your own subscription, or take and build upon that into your own subscription if you find it useful. So I think that's a great getting started point. And again, we've got extensive samples available on Azure and Azure Samples. So if you start to progress and want to do more around like RAG or fine tuning, we've got lots of resources available.
And yes, thank you so much, Lee. This has got us towards the end of this podcast. It was absolutely my honor to have you here. And thank you so much for taking out your time. It was such a good learning experience for me as well. There were so many things that I got to learn in this process of last 30 minutes podcast. And I really appreciate all your times and efforts for taking on and coming here. So yeah, thank you once again. Before we sort of end it, do you want to give any signing off note?
Yeah, so I just want to wish everybody, the future of generative AI. And again, no one is an expert in this technology. This technology is changing daily. So, just start that learning journey and please continue the learning journey. And, hopefully we'll all be experts in the next few years as things mature. But, this is an amazing opportunity to build amazing applications.
Exactly. And I think cloud is a dynamic field in general. So you have to keep yourself updated, even if you're an expert, still you have to keep yourself, updated every 2 months. There is a new technology coming 100%. Up and stuff like that.
Growth mindset, that's the terminology you'll hear a lot from Microsoft is growth mindset. This is about learning and experimenting and trying things new.
Absolutely. So we're ending this podcast on a very good note then. Thank you so much, Lee, once again.
Thank you very much. See you all soon.